Shalom, brother Zakir. Today I want to tell you something like a very deep stuff, and I'm making this video especially for you. And this was one of the things that when I just started with Judaism, learning Torah, this was one of the things that convinced me on the accuracy of the Jewish books, the holy books that we have. And I want to share this with you, and I feel I'm obligated to actually tell you about this because you're an Israelite ethnically, and I think you have to know this. So here's the thing: you probably know about the book called Megilat Esther, the book of Esther. It's part of the Tanakh, and I actually have it in my hand right now, the scroll, which I'm going to show you something from it. And basically, this, since all of the Tanakh actually is written on scrolls, we don't really use any of the scrolls except the real Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, and the Megilat Esther. The rest of the Tanakh, even though we have it written on scrolls and still is in some synagogues and still is taken out, since there's no specific holiday that requires us to read them from scrolls specifically, that's why we don't really use the scrolls. However, when it comes to Megilat Esther, we actually need a scroll, because the holiday of Purim, that's when we have the mitzvah of reading this scroll, and it has to be from a real scroll, meaning handwritten, following all the laws, not a regular textbook like we have for the rest of Tanakh. Now, this also applies, by the way, to the Torah. When we read the Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, we also have to take out a real Torah in the synagogue and read from the real Torah. Now, since we're talking about a scroll here, when a person, a sofer in this case, copying down the scroll from the previous version, he has to follow a certain set of laws, where he has to, cannot write by heart, for example. It's very, very specific and very strict as far as how he copies. The people who write the Torah scroll, for example, they go to the mikvah every time they would write, before they would write. So there's strict laws. You can, when they copy down, sometimes the things that they copy down, they might not even understand exactly why it's like that, but they have to copy down. For example, there's size of the letters. If certain letters for some reason appear small, the sofer who copies down this scroll has to copy it also smaller than the rest of the letters, and so on. So, as the story goes, in the Megilat Esther, there was this enemy of the Jews, Haman, and the Jews eventually, the story was overturned. If you read the story, you probably know how it goes. The scene had overturned, and Jews actually got the upper hand and eventually killed Haman and other enemies of the Jews, the Amalekites. And in the scroll it says that Jews, when they killed Haman, it says they also killed 500 people in the city of Shushan, which were the 500 enemies of the Jews. And it lists the 10 sons of Haman that the Jews basically killed. And I'll show you where they appear. So this is the scroll. And this is where the 10 sons of Haman are listed. So it's kind of hard to hold it because it keeps rolling in. But here's the names. Here are the names of the 10 sons of Haman. They're listed like this, whereas the rest of the scroll is listed, horizontally, but the sons of Haman are listed vertically like this. Now, so why am I telling you about these 10 sons? Now, if you look closely, and since you know Hebrew, this is helpful. In some of the names, we see something strange. We see small letters. Look at this. You see how there's a small letter Taf? Let me try to focus it right here. See, after the Daled, there's a small letter Taf. Now, if you go here, there's a small letter Shin. You see that? Small letter Shin. And then if we go here, this is a little bit hard to see. there's a small letter Zayin right next to the Yud. I'm not talking about the Yud, but right next to the Yud, there's a small Zayin. Now also, take a look at this Vav. You see the letter Vav? It's big. Look at the length of it. Even though it's supposed to be like the rest of the letters, on the same line. But this is like an extra large Vav. So the question is why? And I've looked in the commentaries, nobody seems to be explaining why it's like this. This is, how it's been passed down by tradition, and the sofer who's copying knows that when he copies, he has to copy it exactly the way it is, because this was written by prophets, by Mordechai and Esther. So this is the first question, why we have these small letters, which I'm going to get to explaining. Another question is, it says that the Jews killed these 10 sons, and it actually says it right here, that the Jews killed them. But then a little bit later on in the story, it says when King Ahasuerus asked Esther, what would you like? Even half of the kingdom I'm ready to give you. She said like this, she said, if it pleases the king, let the Jews of the city of Shushan continue do what they did today. Meaning continue killing the rest of the enemies that lived in the city of Shushan. But then she says something very strange. She says like this, and the 10 sons of Haman will be hanged on wood. So the question is, what is she talking about? Right before it already said that the 10 sons of Haman were killed. So where is she talking about that the 10 sons of Haman are going to be hanged? She's talking in the future. Alright, so now I'm going to get to the answers of all this. So basically these small letters are a hint in when the history has repeated itself again in the future. Now, if you know World War II history, after the World War II and after the Allied forces conquered Germany, eventually the UN captured the toughest Nazis, and they made a trial, and this trial became known as Nuremberg Trial. Now, in the Nuremberg Trial, there were 10 top, helpers, top officials of Hitler, יימח שמו. And when they were tried, this went on for months, I think. Eventually, they were all sentenced to death, and they were sentenced by hanging. And they were all hanged on October 1946, October 16th. Now, what's interesting is that, how in the Jewish calendar we are right now in the 7th millennium. In the 6th millennium. We're in the 6th millennium. And we are currently starting, actually, next month, the year 777. Now, if you translate the Nuremberg trial, meaning the 1946, to the Hebrew calendar, it turns out to be the year 707 of the 6th millennium. So year 707 of the 6th millennium. Now, I'm not sure if you've learned this yet, but each Hebrew letter is actually a number. We don't have the regular numbers, what's called the Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, the way normally written in front, like in the whole world. We have kind of like the ancient Romans had the Roman numerals, where each letter is actually a number. So Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and it goes up to 10. Then from 10 it goes 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Then it goes 100, 200, 300, 400, and it goes all the way to 900, and that's actually exactly where the Hebrew alphabet ends, at 900. If you want to write something over 900, you would again write an Aleph with like an apostrophe. That means 1,000. So the way we write digits is, we just, if we want to say, let's say 23, so half is 20, and then we put Gimel is 3. So half Gimel means 23. So anyways, so if you take these small letters that I just showed you, the small letters are Taf, Shin, and Zayin. This is the number 707. If you take the big Vav, the extra large Vav, it is the number 6. So 6th millennium, 707th year. And that's exactly when the Nuremberg Trial happened, where the 10 Nazis were hanged, just like the 10 sons of Haman, the enemies of the Jews. Now it makes sense also what Esther was talking about when she spoke to the king and said, the 10 sons of Haman will be hanged. Now, one more thing, you may ask, but the Nazis are not the sons of Haman. But actually we have a tradition that, first of all, we know from the Megilat that Haman was an Amalekite. How do we know? Because it says Haman Ha'agagi, the Agagite. Who was Agag? If you go back in the book of Shmuel, Samuel 1 and 2, where it talks about Shaul the king, how he fought against Amalekites. Who was the king of Amalekites? He was Agag, by that name, Agag. And what happened was, one of the sins of Shaul was that he did not execute this king, Amalekite king, and that's why Shmuel the prophet, got angry and told him, you did not obey God's word exactly as he commanded. Shaul had his reasons why he did that, which I don't want to get into. But anyways, so we know that Haman is basically the descendant of this Agag, and he's basically an Amalekite. Now we have a tradition that mentioned by Gaon Vilna Gaon, that among the Germans there's a lot of Amalekite blood, mixed in. I'm not sure exactly how he knows where this tradition, how it was passed down, but this is what he mentions way before the war, like about 300 years ago. That's when he lived. So anyways, so in a way, that's why the future Nazis could be called the sons of Haman, which is not a problem, because in Hebrew the son does not always literally mean the son. It could be the son, could be the future generation, just like we are called the sons of Israel, even though my father's name is not Israel. Israel is our ancestor Yaakov Avinu, but we are called the sons of Israel because the word son means future generations of certain person. So anyways, one more thing I want to say is that one of the Nazis, when he was hanged, suddenly screamed, Purim 1946. And this is, when I read this at first, I read this from like a Jewish book that, tries to convince. So I didn't believe it at first. And back then I was in the university. So I went to the library over there. I found Newsweek magazine from 1946. It was in microfilms, archives. And I had to, view it on the special equipment that they had there. And I find the article about Nuremberg Trial. And I actually have a copy of this article over here. I made a copy, printed it. And I find the article, and I'm starting reading the article about the Nuremberg Trial. And I come to this part over here, in which I'm going to try to focus, if I can. Right about here. And actually, if you're interested, I could actually send you the actual article. But here, I'm going to actually read it to you, because I don't think you can see it clearly. And this is what the article from Newsweek magazine, the popular magazine, still exists today in America. This is what it says about this trial, and this particular part is what I want to read to you. It says, only Julius Streicher went without dignity. He was the 10th guy, by the way, to be led to the gallows. He had to be pushed across the floor, wild-eyed and screaming, Hail Hitler! Mounting the steps, he cried out, and now I go to God. He stared at the witnesses facing the gallows and shouted, Purim Fest 1946. And then the Newsweek adds in parentheses, Purim is a Jewish feast. So he yelled out, Purim Feast 1946. And then it keeps going. So not only do we have the exact year with the small letters, right, and the millennium with the large letter, we also have this article where Julius Streicher, nobody knows exactly why, nobody explains, this was right before he was hanged, screamed, Purim feast, 1946. Now, he wasn't hanged on Purim. If he was hanged on Purim, maybe he could be, sarcastic and saying, "Oh, the Jews took over, and this is the Purim present that they got." No, he was hanged in October. Purim is in spring. So once I got all this, I found the article. I kind of did research myself in this case. I found the letters. And actually, one more thing I wanted to say. Now, I had, I mentioned this to somebody in Israel once, some not religious guy, and he was very skeptical. And he said, "You know what?" He says, "Maybe after the war they started writing the Megilat Esther this way, with the small letters, to make it, as if it predicted." So what I did, I found a website that sells antique stuff, and they sell cups, jars, whatever. And one of the stuffs they sold was an antique Megilat Esther, antique one from 200 years ago, from the 1800s. And Baruch Hashem, God helped me that it was photographed right on that spot where the 10 sons of Haman are listed. And I actually have the photograph. I'm going to show it to you in just a second. And here's the photograph. I printed out, in color. And same exact thing you can see here. Same exact deal with the small letters. Here's the small taf. Here's the small shin. And here's the small zayin. And here's the big vav. So this is a Megilat Esther from 200 years ago. So, way before. And then actually I found another one from 1400s. And same exact thing. 3 small letters and extra vav. So now, let me recap. We have the exact year. There were exactly 10 in the Nuremberg trial that were hanged. And there were exactly 10 sons of Haman that were hanged. During the war, they could have been executed many ways during World War II or after World War II. They could have been, shot, electrocuted, whatever. But they were hanged, specifically like Esther is saying. And another thing that Esther is saying in the future. This is one of the questions about the Megilat. And actually, some Jewish commentaries had to deal with this question. Why is Esther talking about the sons of Haman in the future when the Megilat Esther already says before that they were killed? And so when I, saw all this, to me this was very convincing that the books that we have are very accurate, first of all. And even though this Megilat Esther, as far as the importance it is to us, it's not on the same level as the Torah. When it comes to the Torah, the laws are much more strict when copying it. When it comes to Megilat Esther, I would actually argue that this is probably one of the least important books that we have. Why? Because actually, the holy books in the Tanakh. Why I think that, I could be wrong, but why I think that is because in the Talmud it actually says that the rabbis debated whether to even include that book as part of the canon. The rabbis debated, and the reason they debated because even though we had a lot of prophets and a lot of writings that are not in our Tanakh today, many writings, but the rabbis decided that only the stuff that had to do with the future had to be included in the canon. Stuff that were prophecies that were temporary, let's say about certain war the prophet wrote and how it's going to turn out and what happened, and it had no relevance to the future generations, then the rabbis decided this does not need to go into the canon, but into the Tanakh. But so about this Megilat Esther specifically, they were debating whether they should include it, and then eventually they decided to yes, include it. And the Talmud proves why, that this is a prophetic book, not just like a midrash type of a book. So anyway, once I saw all this really convinced me that the accuracy of copying down, and not only the written, the oral stuff, because how do we know all this? That the sofer needs to copy down exactly the size of the letters. Why can't he just make it look nicer and, align all the letters equally? Especially if there's no explanation why exactly these are small letters. How do we know all this? We know all this from the oral Torah, from the Talmud, from the Gemara, Mishnayot. And so I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry that it took a little bit long. I'm looking at the clock right now. It took like 20 minutes to say this, but I think it's going to be worth your while to know this stuff. Thank you.